Hello, and welcome to another episode of Joy and Gratitude. I'm here with my co host, Ms. Beth Mercurio. And Beth, what is our topic for today?
Hello, Neo. Yes, I think what we're going to talk about today is something that I think is super relevant across leadership, which we love to talk about, as well as humans, parents, friends. It's curating independence. It's showing up in a way where instead of telling people what to do all of the time, we coach them and show up in a way in which we're able to empower them to do some of their own decision making. And I think we can give some pretty concrete examples of what that looks like. I know certainly you have a lot of experience on the leadership corporate side of what it looks like when somebody kind of steps in and rescues and sets that as a way in which they lead, meaning they do a lot of it themselves. They struggle to delegate. They are the ones that make the decisions and how that has downstream impacts. And I think we could talk about it from that perspective, which is great and clear. And I would love to hear your thoughts on. And then I think after that, let's talk about how it's just true in human relationship. It's true in a parenting relationship. And I can certainly give some examples of how much I've learned around trying to curate independence. We talk about wanting our children to, you know, fly off and build their own lives, and yet there are some things and sometimes where we probably hinder their ability to do that. And how can we move towards coaching versus rescuing and empowering people to do things themselves?
Hmm. Yeah, the rescuing is it's actually a very good word. A lot of people would say that what they're doing is guiding, which is more in the coaching side. However, the rescuing is not done for the person, it's done for the person that is performing the rescue act. And it's basically done in a way of feeling safe of what the outcome may be because you control the outcome. So you remove the person from having to make an error or have a failure, and you control the outcome to be the outcome that is necessarily comfortable for you. And we do that in business, but we also do it in life. And if you think about it, you brought up our children, and I think we all did that with our kids. Whether it was that they were a bunch of kids, and I was talking to my son about it, to my daughter-in-law, I'm sorry, about that 10 o'clock p.m. Sunday night. Hey, mom, I have to have a poster board and it has to be, the solar system. And immediately the parent goes, maybe they're the smart parent and they have a few poster boards already in the house because they're anticipating that this will happen at some point, or they're the one that's going to Walmart at midnight to pick it up, but they end up doing the project instead of having the child take accountability and responsibility, maybe sitting with the child and coaching the child through the project, guiding, observing, giving feedback, but letting the child change and adjust the course. But instead, they're like, it's 10 p.m. I got to go to sleep. They get the poster board, they get the markers, and they go ahead and they do the project, and they only get a C because they have no art capabilities. But it doesn't matter. But they get the C and they're happy for their C. So that happens with the child. But let's take it to the relationship of spouse.
Mm.
Sometimes we're in a relationship that one spouse may be great at finances, one spouse may be great at taking care of if something breaks in the house, contacting the resources to maintain that house. And the other spouse is great at all the other things that makes a family unit. And we all do that. We all take our responsible roles. But in taking our responsible roles, we also are rescuing that person from having to have responsibility and accountability for those roles. And it sounds wonderful. It sounds like a share of responsibility in the house unit, but it actually can be detrimental if that other spouse does not have a profound knowledge that if something catastrophic happens, they could do it. And we see this in so many relationships as the ages go on,
Mm.
that a spouse may have a traumatic illness or may have a death. And all of a sudden, the living spouse is lost because they never knew how to handle their responsibilities. So in life, it is essential that we are always coaching and guiding each other as to our ecosystem. And when we go back to the employee, if you are a leader, your job is to set the stage for your team to perform at their highest level and to continuously grow. And that means that you coach. That means you facilitate. That means you set the stage for them to be able to thrive. You allow failure. You embrace failure as a learning, and you give them the opportunity to fail successfully, and you celebrate the success.
It's really interesting, and I think as we're talking about multiple examples where this is happening, I think there's like a short term, long term play here,
Yeah.
which is in the short term, it's often easier. If you know how to do it, you're really good at it. You can think about a spouse. Like, I'm just going to do it myself. I don't have the time to teach my spouse how to do this. I'm just going to do it. And I think
Yeah.
in the business world, it's certainly true. And in the parenting world, very true. I'm not going to, I'll just get this done. You gave a great example. I'm just going to do it, which is a short term fix, but it doesn't help that other human. It just means you're now perpetuating or enabling the same situation to recur again. And I think from a business standpoint, certainly I talk about this with clients because it comes to delegation. Like, can you
Mhm.
delegate? And so many leaders will say, I don't have time to delegate. Like,
That's
that's their
absolutely
first instinct. I don't have
yeah.
time to delegate. And I sort of go, well, that's a conversation. We need to talk about that because if you don't have the time to delegate, then this big, beautiful leadership skill, which I think is critical around coaching your employees, your teams, to learn how to do these things themselves, to fail and have you there to help them when they fail, come up with a different scenario. That is one of the key roles of a leader, to lead. So when that comes up, I often say, well, we need to talk about that. If you don't have time to delegate, then we actually have to look at what you have on your plate because you have to find time to get people. Because otherwise, all you have done is given yourself a short term fix and you will have no long term solution. And I will say to you, I had a boss that I will never forget. I used to go in and always be like, I don't know what to do. I've got X, Y, and Z going on, and I'm not sure what I should do. And do you think it should be this strategy or that? And I always was coming in with a lot of questions. And finally, and oftentimes he would answer me and say, well, did you consider this? And I
Mhm.
would always think to myself, how do you know to ask that? I was very jealous because I didn't yet have that experience. I think,
Mhm.
how do you know to ask that? And I realized it was experience, it was thoughtfulness, it was pushing. And what he then finally realized was it was too easy for me to come in. I would come in and he would say, did you think about this? And I'd say no. And then I would go think about that. And he was solving for me in a way.
Mhm.
And he said on his own, hey, I actually don't want you to come into my office like ever again, as nicely as possible, without a solution. I want you to come into my office with a solution. I want you to have thought through what you think it is. I want you to have an opinion, a recommendation, and what you think we should do. And from there, we can have a dialogue. But you coming in with all the different opportunities and potentials and possibilities and a list of questions for me to solve it for you is not going to work. And I remember that day because I thought I had such a pit in my stomach around how would I do that? So that's what I want to talk about is I had to do that. That was a, a new sort of a new regime. You need to come in with a
Mhm.
solution. Don't come in here with questions. And as scary as it was, you know what I did? I found solutions. I had agency and empowerment, and I knew I had to push myself to really get creative in ways that I wouldn't have before because I was defaulting to being, oh, I'm just going to get the answer when I walk in that door. So it changed how I showed up. It helped me to grow. I became more creative. I leaned in ways I never knew I could. So I think that's the piece too. If we talk about spouses, if we talk about children, when we force them to learn some skill that maybe they don't have or that they're relying on us to do for them, they actually start to feel proud of themselves because they're
Mhm.
able to do something they didn't know they could. Maybe they wouldn't have pushed themselves because they got so reliant on someone else to help them. But once they're forced to be guided and coached, but do it themselves and for themselves, there's so much to gain.
Beautifully stated. And as you brought that up, I started thinking about there were multiple studies, one by Columbia, one by Harvard, one by Yale. And they looked at children. And the whole premise was what are the two key factors that separate children that become successful and children that are not as successful, tend to be just on a job track. They do a good job, but they're not successful in their own right. And there were two factors: children that early on were taught to or expected to be solution oriented. They had to come up with their solution. There were children that were either trained in private school or at home to, if they had a problem from a very young age, I'm talking toddler, they had to solve the problem. They had to come in with a solution and have a solution oriented mind. And then the second still was associated to solution was creating a network, having a network of people to go to that they were comfortable sharing their issue or area of concern to solve the problem. They knew that people wanted to help and they knew to use their network. Those were the two big factors that they followed these kids from infancy all the way to adulthood. And then they also looked at other successful people, and all of them had those two things in common. So, what we're saying is not our idea, it's not, it's fact. We must be solution oriented. And we must be guiding our people
Mhm.
to come into my office with a solution. Come into the conversation with your own ideas. Do not expect someone else to feed you. Be ready to feed yourself, but it's okay to ask for help.
Yes. And one of the ways, so I think coming with solutions is one way that we can coach. And then obviously, the other way is to ask questions.
Of course.
And so I think that has been, for me personally, a huge learning for when my children come to me and they want me to solve for them, pushing back a little bit with, well, what do you think your choices are? And oftentimes they'll say, well, I don't know. That's why I'm coming to you. I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about it then. But again, it's now shifting into guiding, it's shifting into what do you think some of the options could be? How could you respond to this? And getting them to come up with potential solutions right there in the moment rather than say, and as I'm talking about this, one of the other things that I have learned, which I love, is trying to, and we have certainly talked about this in other episodes, but trying to maintain neutrality in that moment where they come to you asking for a solution, or in some reactive moment where maybe oftentimes where you come to someone for help, maybe somebody has said something that's upset you, maybe you received an email, maybe somebody on your team is not aligned with your thinking. So oftentimes you're coming because you have something that is not sitting well with you, and you need some support, advice, how to move forward, a solution. It's been really valuable to me to learn how to remain neutral and put a question out into the universe for this person instead of react right there with them. Because one of the things I've realized is if I jump onto their reaction, neither one of us can come up with more solutions. We're pigeonholed into the only solution is maybe one that is not the best solution, but I've joined them in the anger, the frustration, the sadness. And now we're making a choice that's emotional and reactive and not maybe in our best interest if we were able to step away. So, coaching can also be so critical in providing that spaciousness to be more neutral, to take a moment and go, how did that make you feel? And get them to connect with, well, I feel really betrayed. Well, that must be really hard. And then you start to peel back at what would you say that might make you feel truthful to yourself if you were to respond to this person, and those kinds of pushing to get them to really understand why are they so hurt, angry, mad, sad, whatever the emotion is. Because we want people to, we've talked about this desire to get people to go to their primary emotions, to understand instead of just reacting all the time what's going on for them. And I do think that a little neutrality, a little spaciousness allows us to decide, wow, I do have more options than I realized. Or maybe there's a question that before I go off and throw out a response or try something, maybe there's some clarifying question I need to ask from a place of more calm. So those things are all coming as things that I've had to learn over time. I used to jump right on the bandwagon.
Mhm.
She did what? She said what? Oh my gosh. And the next thing you know, I have not given good guidance in how to respond to this person that's
Yeah.
upset them.
Be- and that's so understandable because what you're talking about is jumping into that person's reality, not the truth, but that person's
Yes.
reality of the situation.
Yes.
And it's so easy when someone gives you a story. If you don't ask clarifying questions and you don't ask, set the stage, explain to me, how did it feel? What was the room's reaction? If you're not asking those clarifying questions, you're not observing, you're not understanding the whole dynamics. You are living inside their bubble,
Mm,
and their bubble's emotional. Their bubble has some preconceived ideas, has some prior incidents with that other human or that situation that they're bringing along. And you, as a coach, that's the beauty of being a leader. That's the beauty of being the other spouse, the parent, is you have no limited view of the situation. You have a broad view of the situation. So you're able to see that situation in a very clear way as opposed to the limited view of the person that's hurting. So you're able to help them regulate and broaden their view. That is what we do as leaders. That is what we do as parents. That is what we do as spouses. That's why we complement each other. We complement each other because we're the yin and the yang, which means that we're able to take what's here and bring it over here. And those that can't see me, I basically was with closed hands and then expanded my hands, meaning a broad, open perspective. That is what a coach is. A coach does not sit in your reality. A coach lets you see the clear picture.
I want to take us back for a minute to something really important that you said when you talked about rescuing. And And just to be clear, we're talking a lot about coaching, and I think most people probably have figured this out, but we just mean it in an action, like to coach someone, not that I am a coach or Neo is a coach. We happen to be coaches, but this is all of us in
Mhm.
how we show up with other humans, coaching as an action, just to clarify that. When we think about this action of rescuing, and I'm happy to own for myself very openly that saving people and showing up as a hero is very much a part of who I am and how I choose to participate in the empowerment dynamic, which some people know well is sort of this drama triangle that we can play roles in. If people know it, they know what I'm talking about. And I won't get too into that, but we could do that another time. But there's roles that we all play. And I think the hero role is one that I play a lot. But the piece of it that I want to share is this hero that rescues instead of coaches. So, what we want to do is move away from hero and rescue and move towards coaching. The piece that you said that was so important was that for those of us that do it, we get something from it. And I just want to bring us back there because when you look at it and you think, why am I saving them? Like, if I want to really be a coach, I shouldn't shave. Well, because it makes me feel good. Because
Mhm.
I get to be the one that made the choice that helped them do better, right? There's a lot of uh, self serving that comes out of rescuing. Yes, like I saved the day. I
Mhm.
feel really good because without me, what would have happened? And that piece has been really important for me to shift more into a coaching role versus a rescuing role. I have to go, wait a minute. Is this self serving? Like, is this me doing something because it feels good for me? Or am I in the service of this other beautiful human in front of me? And checking that has been really critical and going, wait a minute, if I'm truly in service of them, I need to be not solving for them. I need to be asking them questions. I need to be helping them to solve it for themselves. And now I feel such joy in that moment when they create the aha. They find their own insight about their behavior or what was getting in the way of them making a particular choice or being stuck in a certain way. That's where I feel I find joy and aliveness. But in the past, the only way I found that was to just swoop right on in and take care of whatever was happening for them and make it go away. But the reality is that does not serve them and it puts them back in the same place. And then I wonder why there's a cycle. Well, it's like because they can't get out of the cycle themselves. I'm part of the cycle, I'm an enabler.
And as an enabler, there's the other coin of that rescuer, coach, enabler, which is resentment.
Mhm.
You see, you do it so much that then you start saying, what is wrong with them? Why am I always saving them? Why am I always the person? Can't they make a decision? You created this, okay?
Yes.
You made your team be the team that is beholden to you to make a decision. You made your spouse the one that doesn't know how to open a car door because you've always opened the car door. That's a stretch. I'm just throwing anything out. Okay. You're the one that told your kids that they can't do laundry because you've always done the laundry. Okay. So they don't know how to do it. And it's perplexing to them. And they just are having an anxiety attack if they have to do it. You created that. But when you do that, you've taken all their power away. And then there comes a time that you're going to be tired and you're going to resent them for what you decided on doing. You decided to be the hero. You decided to be the savior. You decided to create this dynamic. It was your choice. And it even happens to true coaches in the industry that you hear coaches say, "Oh, I'm not doing one on one coaching because it burns me out." Burns you out because you're not coaching, you're saving.
Mm,
So, what's important here is that in a relationship, we should be trading strengths back and forth depending on the situation. Even with your employees, you should be hiring the best people that know more than you on certain topic so you can learn from them. And you are sharing your dynamic, they're sharing theirs, and then there's mutual growth. In a relationship, there's mutual growth because you're sharing, not owning, but sharing each other's strengths.
mm.
With our children, we're sharing our knowledge, but we're also seeing the insights from them because they're growing and they're seeing the world in a lens we would never, ever be able to see because the way they're growing up is different than the way we grew up.
I it's really powerful and important, and it takes us back to self-leadership, which we talk about all the time as this incredible skill, which is to own your role, right? So owning our role in enabling something, owning our role in not having reciprocity of relationship. And when you talked about it that way, this idea of sharing and realizing that every relationship is two-way. There's always reciprocity on both sides if we come from a place of growth and learning. And how can we be in that mindset of questions and curiosity? These are skills we talk about all the time. Growth mindset, curiosity, true seeking of understanding, and guiding and coaching and using our beautiful lifelong learning and experience to help people, but doing that in a way where they still are the ones, because they, as humans, every single one of us has a different life and a different experience and different circumstances. So supporting them in a way that allows them to live their life as fully as possible.
Simply priceless. And with that, it really summarizes what we've been talking about. We've been talking about coaching and the act, of course, the act of coaching and how this is a part of our every single day's life. This is a part of our core as humans. So, my Joy Note song for this episode is Home by Edward Sharpe and the Magnificent Zeros. And it's just about what it is to be home. And that is safety, that is a place of growth, that is a place of love, and that is a place of interchange. What do we have in our gratitude box?
See, let's see. We have the word embrace. Simply put, I think we just need to embrace each other and know that each one of us has something that we can bring to the other. You mentioned whether it be in our home life, in our work life, how do we embrace that there's always something to learn and stay in a place of, the last word you used really stuck with me, interchange. How do we embrace the power of interchange and leverage it to grow as humans ourselves?
Thank you all for joining us for Joy and Gratitude. We hope that we have interchanged the love of experiencing each other with you. And please join us again. Have a great time.